Okay, thank you very much. 12 minutes to talk about your life's work. A bit of pressure, but I think I'll stay with the theme and tell a little bit of a story. And if I was going to tell a defining story about myself, it was when I was 28 years old. I was married. I had a 1-year-old boy and a 3-year-old boy. I lived in a coastal Australian town. I was a doctor. I had a medical practice. I was a keen surfer. And if it was Saturday morning, one year by the Saturday morning of the next week, my wife had actually left and gone back overseas to Canada, where she came from, and I found myself living on my own with a 1-year-old in full-time nappies and a 3-year-old in nighttime nappies, and it put a serious dent into my surfing career. And I have to say that the next 6 months when I had them on my own was both the most difficult and most wonderful time of my life. And having to care for these two beautiful boys and having to be there for them and having to get up in the night and make their bottles and cuddling them in the morning and having baths with them and learning how to cook and all of those things totally changed my life. And it not only changed my personal life, but it changed my professional career. And as a doctor, I moved away from the sort of the 6 and 10 minute consultations and starting having longer and longer consultations and even up to an hour, and really speaking to men, especially older men, and just listening to their stories. And one of the things that I started to do is I pretended that all the men who came into my surgery at any age, I said, what if they were the same man, just at different stages in their life? And what I found was that many of the older men, 40s, 50s and 60s, who I was supposed to treat and who I was supposed to sort of use some form of drugs or medication for, a lot of their issues came from unhealthy lifestyle or addictions, and it could be drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, but it could also be overwork, overeating, bad relationships, whatever, and that a lot of these issues came from some form of deep unhappiness or self-esteem issues. And actually a lot of these issues came back to when they were teenagers and when they were actually going through that transition from boy to man, and issues that happened at home or things that they did. And I knew that I was becoming more and more dissatisfied with the medical system that I was working in, and so I sort of, wanted to think about where I really wanted to work. And what really stood out for me in Australia was how incredibly happy and balanced so many of our young boys are, the sort of 6 to 10-year-olds, and how incredibly unhappy and out of balance many of our teenage boys are. The same kid. And there's actually some research which came out which shows that for a male in Australia, the happiest time of his life is between the ages of 10 and 12 years of age. And by miles, the most unhappy time of his life is between 14 and 18 years of age. And then for the rest of his life, he spends somewhere in the middle between those two ages in terms of level of happiness. So whilst I believe that we have to do work with men and boys at all ages, I made a decision that the point that I really wanted to work was with teenage boys, and especially in this time when they were shifting from boys to young men. And when I really looked into it, what I found was that sort of between 14 and 18, we now have an incredible number of labels for our boys who are struggling, whether it's they've got ADHD or they've got some form of personality disorder, or whether they've got schizophrenia, or whether they've got borderline antisocial behavioural disorders, or all these sorts of things. And we are medicating and putting into various forms of treatment our boys en masse. In some of the communities, 10 to 20% of boys are on medication. Now, how can it be okay? How can it be right that 10 to 20% of our teenage boys are being medicated just so that we can actually handle them? I have a major issue with that, and I actually see that problem getting worse. And so I started looking into, there's got to be stuff that's preventative. There's got to be things that we're looking at in our evolved society before they're getting into trouble to actually stop this happening. And what I found is there's actually almost nothing. And instead, where we're pouring our money and our resources into is once they are in trouble, to try and get them, to try and either manage them or get them out of trouble. And we know we know that prevention is so much more effective than trying to cure, and trying to turn an out-of-control teenage boy around is, one of the most difficult tasks you would ever face. And I know, and having worked as a doctor and having worked in emergency departments for many, many years, I've seen the results, and I've seen what really goes wrong, and it's not pretty. And so I started looking to, okay, well, if we don't have anything, I started looking outside the box, and what really got my interest was that traditional societies all over the world, every single traditional society would always have had some sort of process, some sort of coming of age, rite of passage ceremony to celebrate and acknowledge the fact that their boys were becoming young men. And they all did it, and they all did the same things. And so what I looked at was, what were they actually trying to achieve? Why had they all decided that it was just so important that we had to do something for our boys when they reached puberty? And what I found was that there were a number of key things that they were trying to achieve. And the first was what I call a shift from boy psychology to healthy man psychology. So they would say that boy psychology is what you typically see in a normal 8-year-old, which is, in boy psychology, it's all about me, I want acknowledgement, I want to be seen. That's beautiful. In boy psychology, all power is for me. In boy psychology, a boy doesn't take responsibility for his actions. A boy, if he can't stand with his emotions, if a little kid, if something goes wrong, he has a temper tantrum. And a boy wants a mother. And that's all really beautiful in a boy. But in healthy man psychology, we should hopefully have a vision. And we do what we do because we believe in it. And we take responsibility for our actions. And we understand that we're mortal. And if something doesn't work, we can't just have a temper tantrum and lash out. And we're not actually looking for a mother. We're looking for a relationship with the feminine. And they realised you could not have a society that was run on boy psychology. I mean, imagine if our politicians, for example, still ran on boy psychology and wanted power and didn't, take responsibility for their actions, and it's all about me and all about, holding on to what I've got. And if you talk about the earth as being the mother energy, had this attitude that you could just take and pollute and it would always be okay, mum would always be there. And they realised that this shift was so fundamentally important. And that was the first thing that they recognised. And then the second thing that they recognised in these traditional societies is that every single boy is different. And every single boy has gifts and talents. Every single boy has genius. Every single boy has a spirit. And it's our responsibility to show them that we love them for who they are and we want them to be who they are, rather than trying to make every boy be like what they see on the internet or in magazines and, have to be a certain way. They actually are all different, and they're supposed to be different. And they recognise that when you celebrate and acknowledge those differences, if you bring out the passion and the diversity and the potential in the boys, you also bring out the passion and the diversity and the potential in your entire society. And the third thing they recognise is that boys need mentors. Boys need men who are there for them when they're young men, to support them, to be there when they get in trouble, to talk to them, to tell them stories, to discipline them, whatever. It made a lot of sense for me. And 20 years ago, we started running some programs, and the first ones we ran were called Boys at the Crossing, and then Pathways program, and now there's all sorts of organisations running. We've got the guys from Powerhouse programs here. There's programs called Raising Men. There's Darren Lewis up in northern New South Wales doing fathering adventures. A huge part of this work is also connecting boys with fathers. And I'm proud to say that over 20,000 people in Australia and around the world have been through these programs. And I believe that, for me, the greatest place we can spend our dollar is on actually creating a healthy transition from boy to young man, because that has implications for the rest of his life. I know that. I've seen it. I know what happens when boys go through these programs. And I also believe, I'm hugely optimistic that this sort of work can actually happen within the mainstream. And that not only is it fabulous for the boys, but who actually runs these programs is us men as elders. And it actually gives us a role. And, that, for example, one of the things as a father, and I hear so many men say, is that, having this great desire to pass our wisdom and knowledge onto our boys. And we can do that. But if we do it in an appropriate way, not by telling them how to live their lives, but by actually sharing our stories so they make up their own decisions. And we know the best way to pass on knowledge now is through story. That has an incredibly powerful impact. So I stand here, I think we're at a critical stage. We're at a stage where we could actually very easily destroy the world, but we're also at a stage where with everything we know, we could do something incredible. And that, for me, the connection between the elders and the young men in our community and the ability to pass on stories and the ability to be there and to really support our young men and to help them find what they're passionate about, it shouldn't be something that we just fantasize and we talk about. I want to see this in the mainstream. I want to see all sorts of programs introduced into schools. I want to see this happening all over the world, and I think it's extremely possible. Thank you.